Thank you, Tom. Thank you, the organizers of the seminar, for offering the opportunity to me to share with you my take on this hegemony on the territory. And you might be surprised that I'm going to speak about the territory, but I will start with this slide, which is focusing on the architectural scale, on architectural artifacts, as I see architecture as a kind of built proof testimony of deeper processes, socio-ecological processes, and economical processes that are somehow dictating or having an impact how the territories are being appropriated or how the hegemony on the territory is being done. And I would like to stress these four pictures, but do they have in common, or what I would like to wrap around them, is that I would like to stress here the materiality of the architecture itself. We have from timber, concrete, brick, and metal as a basic material. This is not a casual choice. It has very much to do with the territory, with the identity of the territory and how the hegemony on that territory is being developed. There is a specific relation with infrastructure as well, whether the infrastructure was built in advance or later the architectural artifact was built, and how is the relation between the architectural artifact and the land. I think the plotting system, the plotting layout, and how the dwellers have access to land is a critical issue when it comes to the transformation and hegemony on territorial areas or on territories in general. But you might ask yourself, what do these territories have in common? A very easy answer to that. Those are territories where I've been living. I've been engaged in some number of institutions in the last 7-8 years. So all these areas are areas that I can step into, and here comes a very strong statement from my side. I'm not able to research or to say something or anything about a territory I've not been stepping on, and they are territories that I expect to revisit and monitor in the future. So this is a long-term research, what I'm going to discuss with you in the following 20 minutes. So the upper image is the Midwest in the US, close to Illinois, or close to Urbana-Champaign in Illinois. The cities of the Millennium in Ecuador, a project by former President Rafael Correa. The movable communities, I will develop a little bit more on that briefly. And there is a word we have in Spanish, pelotazo. Maybe my Spanish colleagues can help me with that big shot, maybe. The real estate big shot in the first decade of this 21st century. You can see there Cesenia, which is a real estate development, 13,000 housing units, none of them occupied today. And this was due to the real estate real estate bubble crisis that we went through in Spain recently. So all these territories that are placed in this map, don't panic. I'm not going to talk about planetary urbanization, nothing like that. This only serves me to show you that starting from these four territories, Ecuador, the Midwest, the American Midwest, Sweden, where I'm based now, and Spain, the Mediterranean facade of the peninsula, of the Iberian Peninsula, I started to be interested in these relations between architecture, planning, territory, and the socio-economical processes in territories. And this has been also the focus of many researchers before. I can recall here the first, let's say, book or theory about that, LA, The Architecture of All Ecologies by Banham, but also more recently Imperial San Francisco by Brechin, or Nature's Metropolis by Cronon in Chicago, but also in Guayaquil in Ecuador by Eric Sungedu, and the many analyses by Matthew Gandhi on New York, and several European and Far East metropolis. And all of them, all these authors, both architects and critical geographers, they have been reflecting on this relation between economic processes and the appropriation of urban spaces. But they have been focused on cities, urban cores. So what I felt it was necessary is to widen a little bit the scope and to look at this in a wider scale. And we are not talking only about a world of cities, but about a world of COLO-cities, territories. And I can I could elaborate more on this colo use of the term, but it has some relation with the myth of Colossus, the big statue that was built in Rhodes by the Greeks. But anyway, we can discuss later on during the roundtable, if you would like to. So, what I'm going to explain very briefly, I hope I can make it in time, is the ongoing research that we are doing in Sweden, in Luleå Tekniska Universitet, together with Daniel Movilla and two more researchers there. We have Mar Esteva and Berta Morata. And we start to look at this territory from the palimpsest approach, meaning that the understanding of formation and production of a territory allow a more effective understanding of its potentials. So it's not only about description or reading, it's also about casting some ideas, some guidelines for intervention, a more judicious distribution of goods and services, and a more appropriate management innovation in institutions. The territory is a project. I could add here is a political project, and I will elaborate a little bit more on that. The basis, the economic basis of this territory that you have very diagrammatically mapped on the left side of the screen is mining. I think it was 90% of the ore iron ore in Europe is produced in this part of the territory. So starting from that, big companies, LKAB, which is one of the two big mining companies in Sweden, was building settlements during the 50s, 60s, 70s in the model of a classical company town. The most famous of them maybe is Svappavaara, a project by Ralph Erskine, the British architect that was settled in Sweden in general, but he developed this idea of an ecological Arctic town. So I want to stress here the term ecological. And it was just a vision only partially built. Not all of it was built. And immediately after beginning the project was in 1964, and late 60s, beginning the 70s, there was a big social unrest about the very poor conditions where these miners were living, right? You can see here some press release in the media, in the newspapers. Eric will follow that for sure. And so there was a first failure of how these very utopian company towns were built. So there was a great deal of dissatisfaction by dwellers. But the most dramatic consequence is that many of these cities were built on unstable ground, on unstable land. And today, and this is a process that has been happening in Malmberget, one of these mining communities, since the late 70s, the subsidence of the ground is eating up the city. And you can see that here. So hegemony, and in this case, the big mining company was the one, intervening and acting on those territories. The hegemony on these territories has these kind of consequences. And these people living in Malmberget, they have been evicted for the last 20 years in several phases to the southern municipality or urban core of Gällivare. And this has been really dramatic. They didn't have any voice in that. They didn't have any right. And the process was quite dramatic. So we are talking here about sinking settlements. And so many years ago, there was the Shrinking Cities research. Maybe you know about that in Eastern Germany. What we are talking about here is literally sinking settlements. But of course, this system of exploitation, mining, appropriation, required some energy to keep on going. And the hydropower was the main source of energy. The Lule River is providing 30% of the hydropower for the whole Sweden, and it's been drained out of the county, and it's creating a lot of concern and dissatisfaction by local people living there. And up to 15 dams were built all up to the river Lule. This is the dam of Boreus. But the interesting thing from our standpoint as architects, not only as engineers, is that these dams, they were built by what I call disposable communities. They were communities that were provided a dwelling, a movable dwelling, as you can see here, a community of around 3,000 inhabitants that were moved upstream, downstream the river as a labor force and they were moved as the different dams were being built all along the process. And this is quite interesting, and you might think this is quite exotic or quite exceptional. But if we think in terms of how populations are removed from one area of another in bigger cities, in metropolis like Sao Paulo, for instance, you can start to make some kind of connections. What is the driving force of this phenomenon? In this case, it was again a big company, Vattenfall, which is the energy company in Sweden, the monopolistic, I could say, company for energy provision and production in Sweden. So we are talking here about disposable communities. But the flow of material, the transportation of material is also a very critical component in any economy system. So there was a railway that was built early in the 20th century when a new process, chemical process of iron ore processing was discovered, so the scale of economy went up very rapidly, so they needed some kind of transport infrastructure to take out the ore from this part of Europe, of Scandinavia, to the rest of the world. So they built a railway connecting the port of Narvik in northern Norway and Luleå, in where I'm based now. And Luleå was this kind of harbor city where the steel factory was also located. So what this economic specialization of Luleå produced were some neighborhoods where workers at the steel factory were living. But after the factory not collapsed, but the production chain changed across the planet, so the steel factory was not producing or processing anymore iron ore there, and it was processed somewhere in Korea or China. So these neighborhoods became obsolete. I mean, there was no reason for them to be there. So immediately after, new plans coming from the municipality were done to demolish partially some of these neighborhoods. But at the same time, today, we can see that Luleå is planning for new marinas and new very exclusive areas. So while some residents, they are having difficulties in keeping their own houses, there are new houses being built for another kind of profile or user. That's what I called an unequal city. And last but not least, is the military control. This process was, this system, it even has a name, and it has been theorized by some professor there at LTU. It's called the Norrbottnian technological megasystem. It requires some kind of political military control. And for that, there was a settlement, Boden, where the military base was established. And still today, it's the base for the new increase of military presence in Sweden, and the biggest operations and training operations by NATO are done here. They are called Aurora, and they are partaken by many members and partners in NATO. So still Boden, and in the future, will become a strong military position. And of course, this had a very big impact in the city. What you see here is the Prestholmen neighborhood. It was built for providing dwelling for soldiers, for military people there. But after, in the 90s, the military service was dismantled partially in Sweden, so it was not mandatory anymore. So part of the facilities and the activity taking place here in Boden didn't take place anymore. So this neighborhood, entirely conceived, designed, and built for military purposes, was of no use anymore. So it was partially demolished as well. And still today, there are few buildings which are kept, and they are used to host migrants coming from outside the European Union. So these areas are quite specialized in giving an emergency response, let's say, to geopolitical, if you want to call it like that, situations. So what we have in this territory, in this palimpsest, is a collection of sinking settlements, disposable communities, unequal cities, and specialized neighborhoods. And the methodology, I forgot to mention that we have been tracking down these processes by mapping a long time how these processes have been happening here, following the theories or the approaches by André Corbeau's, from the, let's say, geo or political standpoint, and from the ecological standpoint, the father of the so-called landscape urbanism, which is Ayamahard. So, there is here a clear construction and production of nature, not only a space as such, as we understand it from the architectural field of nature, the production of nature. And this is something extensively developed by Neil Smith, the critical geographer, that very briefly states, and it's a very strong statement, is space is no longer an accident of matter, but instead is the direct result of material production, a process that has a metabolic, and I would add here a political, fundamental character. So following that statement, we have been describing these different settlements from the metabolic standpoint, the interchange of matter, energy, and water in these neighborhoods, in these settlements, because we strongly believe that inequality has very much to do also with the access to natural resources, to resources in general, that is creating a big distress among several social strata, and it is having a big impact in the income of families. So this is the first analysis we are doing at the moment for these settlements. But we have been also describing the morphological process by using the methodology that was established or formulated in the late 70s by Manuel de Sola Morales, and I think that Marta will have something to say about that maybe in her presentation. So again, what we are mapping here, it's these three components I was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation. It's the architecture itself, its material component, the land, plotting, and the infrastructure, and see how these morphologies have been evolving a long time. When it comes to spatial hegemony, we strongly believe that we need to track down time. So knowledge is power, but it is not enough to know a set of relations existing at a given moment as if they were a given system. One also needs to know them genetically, the story of their formation, because every individual is not only a synthesis of existing relations, but also the history of those relations. And for that, we have been seeing how nature have been changing around these settlements. This is an area where rivers have been diverted, literally, and riverbeds have been dried up with no water today, regardless the ecological impact of that. But this is also an area where mountains have been moving, have been removed. So part of our hypothesis or our take when it comes to this hegemonical view on territories is that nature should be seen also as a subject of right. And this is very much related with some of the other case studies, for instance, Ecuador with their Constitution of Monte Cristi, beginning the 21st century, proclaimed for the very first time that nature was a subject of right. And we want to consider that as such. So when it comes about tracking down history, we refer to Harvey also. We think that he is very useful when it comes to the analysis of the capital flow. There's three circuits of capital flow, and we can see them here exemplified in the city of Kiruna. The first cycle is the investment on the infrastructure for commodity production and consumption. Infrastructure to transport the iron ore out of here, but also dwellings for the people living in these workers, working in these mines. Once the commodity is not produced anymore, that infrastructure is not required anymore. So they can be easily removed. As you can see here, in this they are called the Bloodhorn houses in Kiruna. You can find information about that all over the internet. There are videos on YouTube and see how these houses were not demolished because they were regarded to have some heritage value, so they were removed or moved from one place to another by these trucks. The second circuit is the fixed capital and the consumption fund. I won't elaborate on that much because I couldn't make it better than Harvey, of course. But the idea here is that once there is a surplus in the economy cycle, this surplus is reinvested on site in order to keep the people there, let's say. And that's the case for this development, again, by Erskine in Kiruna. This is one of the most acknowledged residential projects in the 20th century, I would say. But in this case, it's not only about dwelling provision. It's also about building a community by some services. Cultural center, healthcare system. So it's about reinvesting in the community in order to increase also the productivity of that economic and ecological system. But what we are interested really is on the third cycle, which is the production of nature and the reproduction of capitalism. One, the resource is exhausted, and there are some prognosis about that in Sweden at the moment. Capitalism thinks or plans for its own reproduction by economic diversification. It's in all political agendas right now. So a more commercial-oriented city, let's say. This is the new plan for Kiruna. And investment on research and development. I'm assuming all of you are very familiar with research and development right now. Actually, I would say that myself, I've been paid by this research and development reinvestment, the third cycle of capital. But don't say that to my bosses in Luleå, because it sounds a little bit too critical. So, what I want to stress here, and we are at work right now in this, is that the horizontal integration of nature, that is to say extractivism as such, that it has been researched in several universities across the world, is not that has decreased, but it's not the only component, let's say. Partly in response to the scarcity of raw materials, a new frontier in the production of nature has rapidly opened up, namely the vertical integration of nature into capital. Capital is no longer content simply to plunder available nature, but rather increasingly moves to produce social nature as the basis of new sectors of production and accumulation. And this is what is happening right now in Kiruna, in one of these settlements. The city, again, it's one of those sinking cities or sinking settlements. It's a sinking town because of soil subsidence. So they are displacing, evicting the whole population of Kiruna, which is around 18,000 inhabitants, to a new location. Funny enough, the new location will be affected by mining processes in the future. They know that. But they don't really care much because the land there is available, is owned by LKOB. So this is the futuristic or optimistic image of Kiruna for the future. And we are working on that at the moment in order to propose a more sustainable, a more, let's say, balanced relation between urbanization processes, this re-urbanization or urbanization 2.0 process in Norrbotten. The production of nature thesis, by contrast, not only assumes no comprehensive domination of nature, but lives, and this is the hope we have, this is the hypothesis and the illusion we are working with at the moment, of nature, but leaves radically open the ways in which social production can create accidental, unintended, even counter-effective results vis-a-vis with this nature exploitation. So this is the project we have right now. I think I did it in 20 minutes. Just to say that the next step will be to jump into the real estate crisis in Spain. This will be the next case study. We even have a name for that, the Iberian housing system, the oil Amazonian system, the food Midwest system, and the ones I explained to you, it's the iron ore Swedish system. If you want to know more about that, there is some of this information uploaded on this website, and I will be more than happy, looking forward to sharing with you in the future developments of this research. Thank you very much.